Hi everyone, just give us a couple of minutes while we just sort of set up some slides.
Hello.
Hi Will, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Sweet. Cool, I'm just going to hit share on the slides. Okay, Will, I can't really see the panelist. I've only got one screen on at the moment, so if you could answer any questions that people might have. We probably, I don't know whether we should give it just 2 minutes, so it's 5 minutes in. Is it worth Will sort of sharing the slides in the chat window and just setting them to make sure that people can they're like view only mode on the slides?
Yeah, sure.
Or we can send the links to the slides kind of after this event and the recording as well.
Either or. We can send them now or.
Sure. Let's just see if let's make sure they're. See if it's on share mode. People only with only people with, so that, they should be public, so people should be able to access that link and it should work. You might just sign in though, but cool. All right.
Nilo, I hope that's how you pronounce your name. You've raised your hand. Is there a question you need to ask?
Oh, is there? He's just asked, will there be a shareable link of the recording afterwards, please? Yes.
Yeah, there will.
Cool. Sweet. Cool. All right. Can you see my screen now, Will?
No, I can't see your screen.
If my screen stops sharing, just give me a shout. Cool. Okay. So we're trying to sort of do a monthly kind of meetup and just sort of cover interesting or relevant like topics in the analytics kind of world and sphere. So we thought like server-side would be a good one to cover because it's relatively new and it's quite sort of technically complex, and also there's lots of kind of mistakes to avoid with it and learnings from that. So we'll just share what we've sort of found out so far. This is the rough kind of agenda. We'll sort of aim to sort of wrap up within an hour or so, and we're just going to go through what is server-side tagging, benefits of it, issues to look out for, and some examples, and we'll do kind of questions at the end. Just a quick bit about us. So we're a specialist analytics agency based in Bristol. So Bristol's just across from London, and we normally do large scale kind of GTM and Google Analytics kind of setups, which are normally kind of international sort of builds or massive like rollouts. And we've been doing this for, wow, too long now, really. But both server-side and consent mode and BigQuery are kind of areas that we're getting increasingly kind of asked about by our sort of clients. So I thought we'd sort of cover that for this talk. And we also do CRO and sort of A/B testing, as well as Google Analytics and GTM, and a bit of paid search as well. These are the companies we work with, which are generally in either sort of finance, e-commerce, or B2B lead gen. And this was the photo from Brighton SEO, I think a couple of months ago, actually, where we the UK sort of team went out and checked out Brighton SEO and MeasureFest. So what is server-side tagging? So in a nutshell, in simplest terms, it basically means instead of loading Google Tag Manager from Google site, you load it from your site or your domain. There's some other kind of benefits that get enabled by doing this when you're in effect in control of the server, not Google in control. Just one kind of key reason why you'd want to do this would be you might have heard about Safari and its internet sort of tracking protection sort of systems that's kind of rolling out, and Safari's kind of general move towards a very sort of privacy-centric kind of browser. The way that the key reason I say why this is important is that Safari uses kind of heuristics, which are very similar to what antivirus kind of tools use to detect does something look like a virus, or in this case, does it look like a tracker? So it's really, really easy for Apple and ad blockers to say, like, just using pattern matching, is it Google Tag Manager or does it look like Google Tag Manager? And obviously, when the domain itself literally contains the word Google Tag Manager, it's pretty obvious. On GTM Server-Side, you can set the domain here and subdomain to pretty much anything that you want. So that makes it less likely that it would get picked up by those sort of heuristic kind of detection tools, because the endpoint is different, and it's thus more likely to kind of get through those. The same would also apply if you're running a website in China, where you can't use a .com domain and it needs to be .cn in order to get past the Chinese sort of firewall. That ability to change that domain via GTM Server-Side is very important and helpful. As it stands at the moment, we currently it recommends using gtm.javascript, but there may be ways kind of to encode that, or using a different JavaScript file name to also remove the risk of any sort of pattern blocking on the file name as well itself. So how does standard Google Tag Manager sort of tracking work? So I'm going to assume a basic understanding of GTM, the client-side GTM. What normal or standard GTM does is, when a website loads, this GTM file or kind of a JavaScript wrapper triggers, and that wrapper has certain logic within it that says, okay, go and load my Google Analytics tag, go and load my Facebook tag, or my AdWords remarketing, or sort of conversions at Pixel, and the logic for that wrapper is you can even sort of see it. It's in JavaScript, so it's not obfuscated. You can even use tools like a GTM spy to unravel that JavaScript and see what's kind of going on within it. What GTM Server-Side does is it basically adds an extra kind of step before that wrapper is loaded. And that sort of step is basically sort of pointing to your servers, and then your servers then load the standard GTM wrapper, or it can go off in a different direction and send stuff directly to Google servers or directly to Facebook servers. So it's kind of basically a bit like a middleware solution. But there are some additional benefits from that. As I mentioned, with standard GTM, where it's sort of you could unravel it, with server-side GTM, it's kind of almost invisible because it's sort of happening on the server. You can't kind of look into a server to see what's going on. So if it's a one-way sort of pixel, and that server's going from the website to GTM server-side, and then to another server, it's almost impossible to see what's kind of happening. The only time you'd be possible to see what's going on would be if there's a remarketing tag or some sort of loop back to the site where you could see like an input and output. But it does mean that you can basically hide what's happening and make it harder to see what's going on. That's very useful in situations where you're trying to, maybe you want to record email addresses, but they need to be sort of hashed, and you need a private key for being able to do that hashing. Or if you've got an affiliate site and you want to do custom affiliate rates, and you don't want other affiliates being able to kind of unravel those affiliate rates, then server-side gives you that ability to do that kind of that private kind of element. And also another one would be if you're trying to do things such as profit per product on an e-commerce website in order to do ROI based bidding, then you can use a form of hashing so that you can send, instead of the actual profit back to AdWords, you can send a kind of a hashed version of that, and then you can unhash it later, so the other competitors can't work out what your margins are. So those are like 3 examples of benefits of GTM server-side. The other sort of benefits would be you can actually do kind of PII cleaning on the fly. So PII is where you have things like email addresses or possible sort of passwords or anything that uniquely identifies a user, such as a postcode or a zip code. So you can sort of clean it or purge that data within that kind of middleware bit here before it's then passed to GTM client side or before it's passed to other tracking tools. So it sort of adds an extra level of sort of privacy protection and control. And also, again, with IT, with what Safari is doing with internet tracking protection and the restriction of cookies to 7 days, server-side gives you the ability to sort of respawn a client-side cookie, so that if you've got a user that you've identified, and they come back to the site, you can in effect get the server to sort of set a client-side cookie to respawn that GA client-side cookie via a server-side cookie. So it's quite a potentially useful workaround if you've got a lot of traffic from mobile. And also, or if you're sending a lot of paid search traffic where you've got landing page parameters where Google's going to, Safari is going to sort of restrict those cookie durations. So here's just an example of some of that sort of server-side tracking in place. The other thing I forgot to mention, on the privacy side as well, if you're sort of sending IPs to a server, you can also sort of purge those IP addresses on the fly. So things like IP hashing, which is a feature in Google Analytics, you could apply that to all sort of tracking systems in one central kind of mode, and just again make it more kind of privacy sort of secure. And also you could look at the signal for do not track, and then you could adjust the logic for that using server-side. The other, on the IP kind of bit, it's also possible to use server-side to do server-side lookups. So things like a lookup table of a product ID to a product type or product category, things that you wouldn't necessarily want to load in client side because they're like massive lookup tables. Those are potentially good instances where you'd move those to a server-side lookup table, run those lookups, and then sort of send the, in effect, kind of enhanced or a data appended pixel through to, Google or Facebook, etc. So that ability to shift that code or look up tables from the browser or the client into the server potentially can reduce the file size and also reduce the amount of kind of JavaScript execution that's going on. So that basically means that it's going to load a lot faster. And it, to be honest, if it's a one-way pixel, as in the server's just sending it or relaying it as not a return back to the client, then there's you can have a very long delay, and it's not a massive problem. Whereas with client-side IP lookups, you've got to wait for the IP lookup to run, wait for the return response, and then send a pixel. So it's kind of like really bad kind of experience and quite a lot of latency that gets added when using client-side lookup methods. So that kind of falls into an area of benefit, which is the site speed. So if you're able to consolidate your code, and instead of loading, let's say, 3 libraries such as ga.javascript, analytics.javascript, and maybe the Facebook event.javascript pixel, those could all be grouped into one. So let's say you send analytics.javascript or in effect the G tag for GA4. That GA4 tag could then be set to send to GTM server-side, and server-side could then relay it onto those four other kind of endpoints. So it means that you reduce the amount of code that you need to add to a site, which obviously improves site speed because it doesn't need to load those files, and that's obviously a key kind of benefit. And also because the data or the files are not being sent to a Google server when they're the files are sort of requested from the browser, it's impossible for Google to do any sort of stealth tracking or CDN style tracking. If you've ever used a sort of jQuery library, be it hosted on Google's site or whatnot, those jQuery libraries potentially can be used to kind of identify users passing cross-domain, because an IP address and the user agent and any extensions are also sent when that sort of CDN library is downloaded. So obviously, if it's loaded from your server, then you have control, and you can in effect disable Google's sort of ability to see those the server hits kind of being sort of requested. And as I mentioned, the email addresses can be cleaned up kind of on the fly for the PII and internet tracking protection. We have this bypass for this 7-day sort of cookie. The other one I forgot to mention is that a common problem is on Google Analytics 3 especially, is there's robots that will guess the Google Analytics account IDs, and they'll send thousands of fake tracking pixels and tracking requests. It is really annoying. It kind of skews the data, and also causes the URL reports and the source reports to have kind of strange referral domains in them. One of the useful kind of features that you can turn on server-side tracking is, in effect, have a simple private key. It can be a fairly easy or sort of small value, and it just means that it's important. The sort of fake spammers wouldn't necessarily know that private key or that sort of server-side value, so they wouldn't be able to send in kind of fake hits. Those fake hits are normally from robots that don't actually visit the website. They just guess a Google Analytics account ID. So in effect, the data becomes cleaner because you've got as you're able to kind of filter out those the robots more effectively. Oh, there's a question in the chat. Oops. The only sort of drawbacks, I'd say, of server-side, so it does mean you've got to host it on Google Cloud, and for a very large site that it would sort of incur costs, but there's basically about a $200 sort of free cap. So that's it's not the hosting costs are pretty minimal, really. The bigger costs are really more in the setup and the maintenance kind of piece. And that kind of technical knowledge in order to do the setup, because you have to add DNS records, or in essence create subdomains and verify those. That is sometimes beyond the sort of skills or knowledge of a standard kind of digital marketer. That's more moves into the realms of a technical marketer or a web developer. Although it's fairly simple to do once you know what you're doing. It's because you're dealing with the DNS entries, and obviously if that was done incorrectly, it would take a site down, or it could affect emails sort of flowing through. It's kind of an area that's probably often I'd probably outsourced, because you wouldn't want to risk, stuff going on, especially on a large site or on a sort of critical infrastructure. You can, if you want, create a kind of a separate domain or a test domain and put those DNS entries in there first, if you don't want to kind of edit the live site DNS entries. So you could use that as a starting point, try that out, and then update the entries to the main site. In theory, you can have two DNS entries, one for a development environment or a different domain, as well as the main DNS kind of entry. One thing I would say on these DNS entries is just make sure that the sort of time to live setting, which is basically how frequently a DNS updates, is set to a low kind of level, just so that if you it just sort of speeds up that sort of testing and sort of setup sort of process. On the drawbacks of GTM server-side, at the moment, with tools such as Hotjar or Crazy Egg, and those tools that monitor mouse coordinates or keystrokes in a form, because that's happening in the browser or in the client, it's not possible technically to do that using server-side code. So those tools, you don't have a choice, you have to use client-side for them. And the same also applies for things such as a single page application, where in essence the browser's doing all the work, be it sending like AJAX requests and getting a response. Those are difficult, if not impossible, to sort of use using server-side. So unfortunately, if you're an AJAX or a React site, then you'll have to sort of stick with GTM client-side. There's also some, obviously the beta tag for GTM server-side has actually come off now, so it's kind of out of beta, but we would still recommend doing a parallel deployment, so adding your GTM server-side code with your GTM client-side code almost next to each other, or having GTM server-side loading like an empty container or a test container first, just to kind of make sure that it's kind of working as expected. So we would normally do a comparison of the page views being sent on GTM or GTM client side versus your GTM server side, just to check that they're both loading okay, and check for the comparisons between both. So you should see maybe a sort of 3 to 5% improvement in sort of sessions and page views on server side, because obviously it gets past some of this ad blocking and heuristic kind of detection. And obviously, as a prerequisite, you need access to your registry in order to be able to add these DNS kind of entries. As part of the GTM server-side setup, it will automatically provision and create a Google Cloud account, which you do have to enter sort of billing details or payment details for, be it a fairly small monthly amount that gets kind of charged to that. and then once that's automatically kind of provisioned, then you'll see the updated interface, which you'll see the sort of clients, which is the new sort of area on the left. So the clients would be in effect the browser. So that would be the GTM tag itself, or GA3 or GA4 kind of in that list. Those clients in essence are then mapped to tags, and those tags would be similar to your standard client-side GTM, so your Google Analytics, your Facebook, etc. The server-side also allows you to sort of relay server-side through to a client-side GTM account. So it's a bit like that first screenshot that I showed. So it means that in effect you get the benefit of both. You get server-side and you get GTM client-side, both potentially kind of active. In terms of the setup, obviously you do need to kind of create this DNS entry, which points to the GTM server-side sort of domain, and check that it's working by going to that /healthy sort of point, and then this is the bit that gets automatically kind of provisioned. For GA4, if you want to set that as an end client, so for instance, say you're doing a GA4 tag and you want to use GA4 for your relay to Facebook, etc., it is also necessary to update the endpoint to point to GTM server-side, and obviously you need to publish that change if you've updated that endpoint. And oops, just going through this a bit. So the debug kind of window and console is slightly different on GTM server-side. So it's but the rest is as you'd expect. I'll just sort of jump to some other kind of examples that this is from our site. So you can tell if a site is running via GTM server-side because you'll obviously see that the domain has changed on here. If you've got a WordPress website, it's actually fairly easy to sort of switch it over. So I'm using GTM for WordPress here as a WordPress plugin, and you can see there's an option in here for basically change the GTM domain. So this is where you'd add your GTM sort of server-side bit, and that then you'll see it kind of get updated on down here. And you'll also see within Tag Assistant, you'll see that GTM server-side domain being kind of run or executed, which is not showing in that list, which is good. So I say that it might be because I'm in signed in mode. Oops. Yeah, so in GTM there, you can see that script, which has got the local endpoint sort of being loaded here. It doesn't matter if you get a full response on here, it doesn't really matter just because it's not being loaded via JavaScript. Yeah, so we'll probably just kind of open this up to kind of questions, and just sort of see what yeah, so has anyone got a question, or does anyone want to be invited to the stage to ask a question? So I think, oops, I think there's an option where it says raise your hand on Zoom. There is a Q&A section, which I do recommend a particular provider of hosting GTM server-side. There are ways of not hosting it on a Google server. So it's built on Looker, so it depends, to be honest. It's kind of simpler with the automatic provisioning, which obviously Google kind of does. You mentioned certain features that aren't available in server-side. Can you tell us what they are? Well, the main sort of features would be the fact that you can't do anything in the DOM. So the mouse coordinates, the keystroke tracking, and the only other minor one is just with the sort of caching of the file, which you would yeah, it's it's mainly those two, and then it's more the technical aspects of sort of setting it up. Can I see a recording in retrospective? Unfortunately not. I mean, Google the server side is not. It's more of a middleware or a technology. It's not really sort of tracking the pixels itself. It's more of something that facilitates you to store those sort of, or relay those pixels server to server. And there are tools such as like segment.io, which would also make a copy of the request, and then they have the ability to do historical sort of recaptures or resends. And with GA4, obviously GA4 now has the ability to process historic events, whereas GA3, even if you've used a tool such as Segment, and you've got that historic sort of replay, you can't really send the data in without it all being set to like 1 day, or the date that you ran the import, whereas GA4 does allow that historic replay. So there are some benefits of having historic data for GA4. However, obviously that replay feature is something specific to Segment. When telling clients that the websites have changed by a percentage amount, how do you choose to explain the transition? So we just run a Google Sheet that pulls in the two different data sources. So let's say the GA page view fired via GTM client side compared to the GA page via GTM server side, and just run a diff calculation per day. We would always start with the count of page views first, then sessions, and then users. And it's a similar sort of thing, pretty much the same as when there was GA Classic and we did migrations from GA Classic to GA Universal. Very similar sort of process. Obviously, at least we don't need to worry about referrals affecting the numbers in this instance. Do you think it's wise to use a server-side GTM to fire pixels and marketing tags, and run regular client-side to fire all other events I would, to be honest, it would make sense to consolidate stuff. So I wouldn't. I mean, when I talk about the testing of a pixel being sent on client side versus server side, the aim really is to get to a point where the server side is more robust and more reliable, so you can get rid of the inline client side code. And it'd be the same if you looked at obviously Simo's website, and on his blog, he's stripped out the inline client side and just gone with server side, be it server side running the client side GTM So I guess the short answer is you just want to make it easy to maintain. So you and you yeah, so that temporary step of being able to run those comparisons is necessary. Once you've got beyond that bit, it would then be a case of just only loading GTM server side. And then obviously GTM server side could be set to load, you know, if you wanted just a GA4 tag and then just get GA4 to relay server to server. So if you're doing that, then obviously you wouldn't need a GTM client side tag. For the listeners that you mentioned, so like tactical, auto events, and etc., those are always going to need, they are client side listeners. The only, in theory, it might be possible at some point to connect GTM server side to Apache logs or IIS logs, so that then like server side hits to PDF downloads and such could then be relayed, but that's not a feature that exists at the moment. So it is still necessary to use client side auto event listeners, which I think you're kind of referring to there, Sasif, if I hope I've answered that question. I'm just looking at the chat now. Is it possible to have same page with that way the page down? So the question is it possible to have GTM firing server side and client side? Yes. On the same page? Yes. With that way the page down? Not really. I mean, obviously it depends what extra is loaded within GTM server side, but as I said previously, the end game would be to move the GTM client side into GTM server side. So maybe if I show an example of what I mean by that. So in here, where I've got GTM, it says server side test, and within here, oops, it's got a nested GTM client side container. So what's happening here is that GTM server side is running. That's this container here, this one, and you'll see that kind of on the site. And when this runs, it then also loads the GTM sort of standard client-side container, which is this container. So in essence, it's this container can have your auto event listeners and stuff within it. So like the end game is to set it up in this way and then get rid of that inline GTM server-side container for this one here. Obviously, yeah, so that's kind of what I'm referring to. So that shouldn't cause any weight on page speed because you're just moving it, that existing GTM container with your auto event listeners from raw or kind of inline into GTM server side, which is then injecting it. Won't be so we won't be able to create first party cookies either, as long as the domain that you're using for GTM server side is the same top level domain as the site you're hosting on, then you can still create first party cookies. My bad. Is it possible to have GTM firing server side and client side on the same page? I think it's the same question. Does anyone want to sort of jump on the stage to kind of ask a question or raise their hand? We've still got sort of 20 minutes left. I'm just seeing. We also, as a slightly different sort of subject, we've got a sort of tool that we're going to launch next week. So I was also going to just put the link to that maybe in the chat, because we could do with some sort of feedback on that. The other thing I put in terms of notes on here was mistakes to avoid on server side. So making sure always the endpoints are always HTTPS rather than HTTP. Sounds obvious, but it could cause problems. Making sure you've got A records and IPv6 sort of records, like both should be kind of set and without any kind of white spaces when you're adding them in the DNS kind of entries. And then also be descriptive when you're sort of creating sort of tags in GTM server-side. So for instance, in here, we've said GA3, GA4, or web container. And we've specified the importance of those in terms of what we want to load sort of first. Oh, someone's raised their hand. So Many, I'm gonna invite you on the stage, panelist.
Hello.
Hi, Manny. Can you hear me okay?
Phil?
Yeah,
Good,
thanks.
I can hear you. Yeah, good stuff. Yeah, thanks for hosting this. I just want to ask, I guess, me and my colleague are on today, and we were wondering if you had any sort of like anything sort of to share on your experience of like doing server-side implementation on other sites and what your sort of, I guess, obviously, I know it's, you've seen great results, but anything sort of specific in terms of like what kind of percentage increases you've seen in that sort of like page speed and any case studies that you can like refer us to regarding server-side implementation of Google Tag Manager?
I mean, it's still a bit early days in terms of the kind of data. I think on the Google's official like blog post where they talk about server side, they state like a 7% increase in sort of conversions in effect from kind of pixels that have not been sort of blocked. We're about to do a rollout for a site in China, so I'll have kind of some data from that in the next kind of couple of weeks. I don't know if you've done any ones in China yourself.
Me,
Yeah.
no, absolutely no. This is like sort of like the first time we're coming across sort of server-side implementation, but no, it's yeah, like I said, we're just like sort of interested to see if there was anything.
From what we're seeing so far, it does kind of mirror that sort of 5 to 7% sort of boost in terms of like bypassing kind of ad blockers and sort of heuristic detection. I think on the flip side, bear in mind that a lot of kind of sites are being hit from both sides because users can potentially opt out, and then also you've got sort of ad blockers and stuff disabling or blocking GTM as well. So I mean, the server side is something that is becoming necessary, especially with what Apple did with Facebook, where they basically kind of turned off like the lights on Facebook and sort of massively disabled their visibility. So I think Facebook now are sort of recommending GTM server side as a solution, especially on apps, to sort of get around that restriction in the client.
Yeah, absolutely. For us, that is obviously a big one of the big things that we're always trying to battle was like digital marketers, like the sort of like the consent and how we can sort of get around, well, not get around it, but obviously like try to offer users a good experience, but at the same time sort of like in their transparency. But I guess for me the for us, our focus is a lot on the page rate, the page speed. So sort of like if there was anything like what you saw in your experience in terms of like how it's affected page speed and if that helped SEO rankings, for example, and because obviously that's like a big factor, isn't it? Like page weight, page speed, page performance. So we were more probably like I was like probably more interested on that front, if anything. But if not, no, it's all good.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean that is so SEO. So site speed is an SEO ranking factor. And also it's just good for conversion points for stuff to load quickly. To be honest, the main benefit is still on the conversion side. The site speed bit is because JavaScript is normally fairly kind of efficient in the browser. There are benefits, but you could also get similar benefits from kind of optimizing images and using a CDN. So I would, for a moment, from what I've seen, it's more the conversion angle is and the fact that making it harder for a Safari or a browser to sort of turn off the lights. So it's that future proofing kind of piece, which is at the moment more important than the site speed. But the site speed is a nice secondary benefit. The other thing I would say on that and on the consent piece, at some point, the browsers are going to introduce a kind of a browser-based opt-in and opt-out that will also help with site speed when it becomes available. But I think it's interesting seeing the Google is sort of followed from what Segment has produced, and that sort of shift to server to server, and because it kind of makes it harder to sort of stop tracking then if it's server to server, and you get closer to that sort of 100%. I mean, if it's going, you can't kind of block things kind of happening behind the scenes. So it's sort of a necessary future-proofing kind of step, and obviously the fact that it's almost free is great in terms of what Google have kind of sort of made available. I'm just going to jump. I'm just going to jump to the tool that we're going to launch soon. I know it's slightly deviating a bit from the discussion today, but we're just keen to get some sort of feedback on it. I'm just going to find the link, which I'm just going to put in the chat. Whoops. So we're building a GTM cleaner, which is the one that you're sort of seeing in the screen. So it's just gtmcleaner.measuremindsgroup.com. This is for GTM client side. In theory, you could we may build a GTM cleaner for server side as well at some point. This will basically rename or clean up a GTM account. So it's standardizing the naming conventions being used, and also it sort of moves it deletes inactive tags and makes it a lot easier to sort of merge a container with a sort of pre-built sort of template. So if you could sort of try it out and use the sort of feedback kind of button, which is in the bottom right of the screen, or bottom right where there's a little click for email feedback. If you've got an account that's got lots of GTM containers in it, it might sort of take a few moments for it to return the list of containers on here, in the sense that mine's got quite a few kind of in it. But yeah, if you could try that on your account, it creates a new workspace, so it won't kind of edit your existing setup unless you sort of merge that workspace. But yeah, feedback on it would be greatly appreciated, and we'll release a kind of blog post and a video explaining it sort of next week. Oh, my screen is not shared. Oh, that would help. So this was what I just showed you here, is just the GTM cleanup tool, which I've just put a link to in the chat window, and we'll put a link to the video explaining this tool sort of next week. Cool. Manny, the metrics I mentioned in terms of GTM server side, I'll again in the notes kind of after this call, I'll just send you the numbers that have been sort of publicly kind of sort of shown or on and as I say, we're going to get kind of data from this Chinese container sort of in the next couple of weeks, so we'll have some sort of numbers to share on that. I mean, bear in mind that ad blockers can be affected by the industry or vertical. So in certain sectors, there, you get more of a benefit than others. So I've mentioned the GTM cleanup tool. If you want a sort of free audit of your Google Analytics account, we do a kind of a 1 hour sort of live audit. We'll basically just go through and find sort of problems and solutions, and we'll sort of send a link to this the talk from today. We've still got about sort of 10 minutes for questions left. So if someone's got a burning sort of problem or question, please sort of ask away. Otherwise, we'll sort of end early. Fun fact: I'm actually traveling in Italy at the moment, so I'm currently in Venice, and because I'm sort of getting back on the sort of the conference circuit, thankfully, because things are sort of opening up a bit. But they had like really severe rain yesterday in Venice, and it completely knocked out like the internet connection in the hotel. So that this morning I was like trying to sort of connect and have pretty much ended up with a sort of a 4G sort of connection. So but managed to connect for this webinar, and so that's all good. Although the streets are still a bit kind of might need like a dinghy to kind of get through the streets, because still a bit of a swamp outside, unfortunately. But cool. All right. So the other last thing is a small sort of request. If you have a topic that you want us to cover for the next webinar, if you could put it in the chat, so be it like consent mode or how to audit a GA account or GTM account, just sort of put it in there. Or if you want us to talk about like setting up a consent management tool like CookieBot or OneTrust or etc., just kind of put it in there. We're sort of attribution. Yeah. Actually, the new GA4s, I think they've rolled out. You can now change the attribution setting in GA4, and I'm hoping they're going to roll out data-driven on GA4 really soon. So that would be definitely a topic to talk about when they finally sort of roll that one out.
Phil, does that join up like sort of like display data, or is that correct? You know, like sort of like, for example, because it's in Google's ecosystem, you know, remarketing, and is that kind
of not unless you're on the sort of paid version of Google Analytics, as in Google Analytics 360 for GA4. Yeah, that was one of the benefits of on GA3 is the connection to the kind of double click publisher data and getting impression data into multi-channel funnels. You can still use as a free workaround in the sense that you can use the AdWords legacy remarketing pixel, and that shows view through conversions. Yeah. But yeah, I've not yet. I don't think they've enabled a free way to see impression data in GA4 without having to pay for 360, unfortunately. So when we talk about data-driven attribution, we're still talking about that first-party attribution data. We're not talking about impression data. I mean, it would be really cool to have to get free access to that impression data for view through conversions and impression kind of influence, but I don't think it's there yet. Google's new conversion settings, I'm sure they make sound more complicated, but okay. Thanks for clarification. Sweet. Okay, we've got sort of 5 minutes left. So yeah, as I said, if you've got any other further questions, just email us on hello@, and we'll answer those. And yeah, if you could please try out the renamer sort of tool and give feedback on that. The other thing that may be useful for the renamer, in fact, the next step for it that we're going to do is we've already got quite an extensive list of there's a sort of tag library that is like a public sort of a list of setups. And in effect, the plan is to allow people to use that renamer, and then they can sort of access the sort of tag library. So I think it's in another one. So that's within here. So there should be. Yeah, so there's a long list of tags kind of in that in this kind of GTM template list that will if you want access to that, just ping me an email and I'll add you to the user list for access to those kind of like read-only sort of templates. Cool. All right. Hopefully that's been helpful for people. And as I said, we'll also schedule another one for a month's time. All right. We'll sort of stop the recording now, and I'm going to go and munch some Italian pasta, I think. So cool. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone.